Imagine building 5,000 homes and getting 27,000 homes through planning. That would be an impressive feat for any house builder. But now imagine you're a local authority and you're the head of that local authority. Well, that's what my guest today achieved. Darren Rodwell was the leader of Barking and Dagenham Council and reduced temporary accommodation spends 5 years running, as well as building the most amount of affordable homes of any borough in his tenure. Listen to this episode to find out more about what local authorities can do to reduce housing benefit costs over time and increase the number of affordable homes for local residents. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Rodcast. My guest today would have an impressive track record for a house builder, let alone the ex-leader of a London Borough Council. I'm very pleased to welcome Darren Rodwell.
Thank you very much for being here, Rod. Excuse my cold today. There's not much I can do about it.
Listen, you've been at Mippin. It happens. Weather wasn't great, I hear. So.
No, I got soaked every day, so it was perfect.
So, Darren, you were the leader of a London council, Barking and Dagenham. But let's go back to the beginning. What came first? Was it your interest in housing and communities, or was it the politics?
Oh, it was certainly community and housing. So I was one of the first men under the Children's Act to win custody, residency of a child in 1990. At that time, I couldn't get a council place, despite that I was a single parent. And I saw then that there was a breakdown of housing and housing facilitation to the wider aspirations of community. And then when I spoke to my community, because back in the day, obviously we had the BNP turn up, and I wanted to know why, as a community leader, before I even got into politics, I wanted to know why people felt that an extremist party was an answer to the questions they were posing. And it very much, and I talk this through as a power of three. So when I talk about inclusive growth, I talk about the power of three, 5 steps to change, 7 conversations of the community, and 42 building blocks to make it happen, which is the wheel of inclusive growth. But the power of three, the first one is so important, and that is everyone wants a home, regardless of its tenure. They want it to be warm and safe and truly affordable to them. Secondly, they want to live in a community that shows value to them and they can show value to it. And then thirdly, they want their community and their children to do better than they did, right? And that is the first ambition triangle. Now, I talk about triangles and people go, why do you talk about triangles? Well, if you're that young lad or young woman and you're thinking about your home and you are that 5-year-old and I ask you to draw a picture of your house, now bearing in mind I lived in a flat, it would still be that triangle as the roof, yeah? And that's really, really important, because everything we do in threes. It's the most important structure in nature. Actually, it's the strongest structure, and that's the roof over your head.
So one of the things you are known for is affordable housing. Can you give me your distinction between what affordable housing is and what social housing is?
Okay, so again, I want to go back, all right, because we've got to see why it's changed. Right, so if we go back to 100 years after the Anderson Act, we can go back to 1890 if you want, when we talk about the Housing Act for the working poor. But the Anderson Act, Homes for Heroes. After the First World War, we realised that we needed to do a big house building programme. When I say we, I mean the country. So the Becontree estate, where I live, I'm very proud to live, the largest estate ever built in the country's history, 27,000 homes, was part of a nationwide expansion of housing for those that had gone through the war, both home and abroad, because it was a national issue for everyone. And what it was actually doing was it was bringing the Victorian England to an end and bringing us into a new era of 20th century aspiration, hope, business, growth. And the Greater London Authority was built, so Barking and Dagenham, which was once fields, was now industry, and the whole estuary was the powerhouse that powered London's aspiration of growth and wealth and influence. And so Barking and Dagenham was made as a very, very proud industrial town, part of London, because there's no such place as London really. There's 32 villages that make it up. So with that being said, these were homes for heroes. After a couple of generations though, everyone expected it. So this is, you know, this was now council housing, because the council will give you a home and business will give you a job. And that was the relationship. And then around 50 years ago, not quite 50 years ago, but it then changed because the right to buy came in. And what we were then told was, it's no longer about the common good, it's about you as an individual. And those that couldn't afford it or didn't want it were then told they were in social housing. So over 80 years, we went from this real aspiration of everyone has a value in our community and society into, actually, you're not good enough to own your own home. So you're now in social because you're on the benefits, you're on the social. And that I saw as a real derogatory step in when we talk about housing. Now, people then say affordable. Well, it's a meaningless term, because if you talk about affordable housing, are we talking about social housing as one class, which is normally HAs and council equivalent rents? Or are we talking about target rent, which is both in the LHA? Are we talking about London living rent, if we're in London, 65%? Are we talking about intermediate rent at 80%? And then
shared ownership.
Then you've got market rent, and then you've got shared ownership, right? So actually, what are we really talking about? What we're talking about is the infrastructure that allows growth to happen. And that's a whole different conversation. So what are the two differences? One is you get it at the lowest rate today for the poorest communities, yeah, which means most people working in London today will not be able to get a council place. And we've got to be honest about that. So affordable, and what that actually means is actually, this is about saying you can afford to pay a bit more, and we recognise that. Now, that's where I came in, because I then took it as a business model that allowed inclusive growth, which said we will have no poor doors, we'll have no gated communities, and people, whether they're on what would be classed as social rent or whether they'd be paying full market rent and everything else in between, they would be living on those estates together. So it's a true blind tenure, mixed tenure approach to housing. But the two, really, there shouldn't be any distinction, but there is, because unfortunately people need to be polarised in the way we do housing currently in.
So actually all housing should be affordable, and to a degree private housing is, because it's what that person can afford, whether they're privately renting or privately buying. It's where it's actually, if like you say, with benefits and things like that, then it becomes something else, or labelled as something else rather.
And that's the problem. Yeah. It's the labelling. It's you know, the echo chambers of negativity that seem to be going around. You're not good enough. You can't be in this. I mean, what we need to be saying is actually everyone is valued, and what we are doing, whether it's the state directly or whether it's private institutional funding, what we should be saying is it doesn't matter what the mix of funding is. We're building the housing that will be aspirational, that will bring a whole new group of people along in communities that want to do the best in life. And we saw that 100 years ago. So people forget that council housing is BTR, yet everyone thinks it's a new thing. It's not. It's about learning and adapting. So I'll give you the best example. 50 years ago, you'd have a factory. It'd be one owner, 90% of the staff would be on the same wage. Mm-hmm. That was easy to understand. So council housing connected to that directly. No problem whatsoever. 50 years later, there's now 30 companies in that same factory building with a much wider range of incomes to the staff that are working in that building. Yeah. Well, we're still thinking of housing and the whole notion of housing, both politically and privately, in the 20th century, when what we should be looking at is the 21st century, where you bring the community rent model in, which is based on your income and your need, yeah, which allows you to live in an inclusive community that has the right social infrastructure that allows you to be aspirational.
So you mentioned 100 years ago, you got it right. Yeah.
Well,
to a point.
Yeah, some of it. Indoor toilets were a good thing.
Sure. How did they fund that?
So, again, this is quite funny, because actually it's all the models we're talking about today. So, as I say, council housing is BTR, right? It's just the state's version of BTR. And so they had to go to the institutions, they had to get equity, they had to get bonds, they had to do all the stuff that we talk about today. They had to do 100 years ago. The difference then was, though, they did it on the back of a world war. Yeah, the country was broke. The empire was sort of dissipating. You know, there was a lot of change happening. But what them politicians realised was their job was to facilitate that change, both directly and indirectly, but also work alongside business. Now, the problem we had was with the deindustrialisation and becoming a service economy, there was a bit of a divorce. If you take the state being mum, because we would be looked after
Sure.
traditionally, and if you take traditional, you know, partner would be the mum, and dad would go out to work. Now, again, thank God that's changed as well. It can be either or. I've been both, so it's been great. But the truth is, 50 years later, that divorce is really starting to bite, because if you like, the state only gets the handout from central government, the benefit, yeah? That benefit's been cut over many years. So actually institutions like local government can no longer be the parent of the community. They have to be the partner and the facilitator of the ambition of that community, and then find partners to invest in that ambition and celebration of community. And that's what I was doing in Barking and Dagenham for 10 years. I was sort of saying it had to be led by the community, facilitated for by the local authority, and invested in by partners. But it is interesting, because the models are there, and it's just about being open to it and not allowing the ideology of thinking to block it. And I say that in the respect that both major parties, and you know, there's nothing wrong in this, but if you think about Labour, you talk about council housing, market rent and for sale. If you're talking about the Conservative, you're talking about for sale, market rent and council housing. Well, what about the 80% in the middle of that? Mm-hmm. Because you know, there's 80% of our communities that are not being facilitated for. So we do need a 21st century.
You kind of touched on a few things that I want to go into detail. So during your time at Barking and Dagenham, you successfully reduced temporary accommodation.
I did, yeah.
And so you reduced the spending of that 5 years consecutively.
Yeah.
How did you do it?
Oh, I had a magic wand. No, look, I looked at the problem. And what was the problem? Well, the problem was you had not enough housing being built. That was the first problem, in a way that was conducive to the community. And I can say that, you know, in Inside Housing last year, they recognised Barking and Dagenham as being the largest council house built company that we had, with Be First, in 23-24 in England, which I thought was quite an achievement. At the same time, though, we built 20% of London's social affordable housing since lockdown.
So it's not just the amount of housing, it's the affordable housing.
Well, it was the affordable housing, because 85% of that housing went to local families. Mm-hmm. Yeah, remember, nearly a third of the borough are paying market rent. So it's a misnomer when they go, oh, we're going to build all this for sale, and you know, that's really, really good. Now, it is good if you can buy it and live in it. But most people can't. Most Londoners can't. So what happens is you have a false economy where people pay out in the first instance market rent, and then find that they can't afford it any longer. Then they have to come to the local authority and say, we need help. And then the local authority's in the are then finding really difficult. So not only is it the temporary accommodation bill, but it's also the social care cost as well. And that's what's making councils fall over, because we haven't funded housing as an investment of aspiration for a very long time. And we're expecting the private developer to pay for everything. That's the government's narrative now for a very long time. Now, I'm hoping some of that changes under the current government. I hope they listen to some of the stuff I wrote for them many years ago and some of the stuff I've led, because I was able to show that if we all play our part, actually the citizen can be better off, both financially and emotionally. The state will be better off because actually the cost to the state will become less, and the investor, the developer, the investor will be better off because they get a better return to the funds that they put in over a longer period of time, especially under the BTR model.
So give us some figures on what you achieved at Barking and Dagenham. So, because it's incredibly impressive, and people will, I'm sure listeners will be impressed and shocked to hear actually how many properties were built under your leadership. And they'll all be asking, my next question is, what do other local authorities need to do to replicate that?
Okay, so the first, I'll answer it in two parts. Remember, the first bit was building, but we couldn't build enough housing for everyone. The second bit was making sure that people that were getting into trouble, that we knew that they needed help before they knew they needed help. So we were able to prevent homelessness as well. And it was also being clear to people what the waiting list was about. Yeah. And the truth today is you will only get a council property if your need is greater than someone else's need. And that is the case. So we have to be honest about that. So between all of those elements, I managed to take our list, which was around about 11,500 people on the waiting list, down to 4,300 or 4,400, something like that, which was pretty decent in 10 years. I was able to build, say, 20% of London's social affordable housing, TA 5 years in a row reduced. So the model itself worked really, really well because it was being honest. Yeah, and you've got to start with honesty. If you can't start with honesty, there's no point in doing it. It's why I never saw myself as a politician. I saw myself as a community champion, because I'd rather be honest, and even if people didn't like it. And there has to be relationships as well, because you have to find the right people to invest in the vision. And that can't happen just having a business meeting. You know, you have to understand. Many people came into me and said, oh, you know, we can invest here. But if they never spoke about my community, if they never spoke about the aspiration of people, person, place, then I weren't interested in working with them because they didn't have the same. I remember one developer coming into me and saying, we want what you want. And I said, no, let's be honest about it. You need to make a profit and I need to build a community. Yeah, but between us,
we can work together.
Yeah, we can find a middle ground, you know. So those conversations were very much the case. So that sort of answers the housing bit. But the second part of your question was, because I'm full of cold and I've just forgotten it.
So the second part was, how can other local authorities replicate what you did?
Well, that's easy. They can ask me to come along and help them build an inclusive growth strategy. I wish. No, so I'm already working with some local authorities outside of London, it's fair to say. I'm working with some private sector organisations as well, because it's about building a master vision before you do a master plan. So developers, councils, institutions think about the red line, the map and the walled. Communities think about doorsteps, streets, neighbourhoods. And it's how do you bring those two together? How do you layer it in a way that brings aspiration to people, purpose and place? And I'm not going to tell any local government leader how to do something. What I can say to them is what I did was unique. Certainly when you think we had Brexit, COVID, cost of living crisis, you know, yet I still managed to outperform. And if you look at the deprivation index of BND, it was the worst in the country. We had more, under the ONS census, we had more indicators than even Blackpool. And we had the highest churn of community, we had the highest population growth at the time, the highest youth population. So we built the equivalent of 20 new schools. So we extended some schools and we built absolutely brand new schools. Some of them special schools, but we had the most inclusive schools in the country. We were first choice. We're giving parents their first choice, the highest in London. And I also took the schooling from 68% of good to outstanding schools, with 20 less schools at the time when I first started as leader, to 97%. And I brought in 3 universities. So it isn't just about the built environment. Yeah, bricks and mortar is important. It's also about the hearts and minds. And so what I try and do now in my new world of coming out of politics is to say, look, if you are truly interested in trying to build communities, then I can help you. Yeah, I can give you strategic advice. So I call myself a strategic advisor on inclusive growth. Yeah, so I can do it. I can help those companies that want to understand what ESG is really about without taking the shirt off their back. And I can help local authorities who actually want to serve their community rather than carry on being that parent who can tell their community. And that's not saying they've done it wrong, because every local government entity has been set up to be the parent. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different mind shift. And, you know, as I say, turning the local authority into a different entity was paramount. We saved £54 million in what we called Ambition 2020, which was how we had to reduce the running cost of the local authority, but empower the community to have more say in the outcomes that they were part of. It's been said, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it was said that in my first 3 years of leadership, I did more consultation and listening than the local authority had done in the previous 30.
That's interesting what you said about the local authority being the mother, but you kind of also were getting at the fact that they've got to kind of put their oxygen mask on and look after themselves, because otherwise they can't look after everyone else. And so they've got to be sustainable financially as well. Yeah. And so with that in mind, going on to your Be First model, do you just want to explain to listeners what was Be First, what motivated you to establish it, and what problems were you trying to solve?
Okay. So what motivated me was that the system as is, local government, is broken. And you know, the government is trying to put things in place now to help change the system. Now, some of those bits people will like and some of the bits they won't like. Now, for me, the biggest issue we had, and I think I started this at the very beginning of our conversation, was about homes. We hadn't done any house building since the late 60s, early 70s in any real numbers. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have that expertise.
Which is pretty normal across the country for local authorities.
Absolutely, right? And remember, local government is run by lay people, as in we lead policy, right? So I'm not a chief exec of a council. I wish I was. I'd have had 4 times the amount of salary that I was getting and the pension, but we won't go there. But what I was, though, I was the political lead and the policy lead for the people, purpose and place. And so what I looked at, and from my background of being in private sector business, in doing the roles I did, I looked at the problem and said, right, how do we find a solution to the problem? Now, if you think that house building was a problem, we didn't have the staff, we didn't have the know-how or the expertise, and ultimately, nor did we have the money. So we needed to, first of all, understand what the community wanted in real granular detail, and the aspiration of that. And then we needed to then rebuild a narrative around it. Now, everyone jokes, and they thought it was funny when I came out with Barcelona-on-Thames, Rodin Riviera, Mini Manhattan, Digital Dagenham, London's Hollywood. I can go on, the list is endless. But what I was actually doing was I was articulating to the sector that actually there was aspiration here. And what I was doing to the community was saying, I've listened to what you want, I've heard it. And actually, I want to bring investors in. So if we talk about MIPPing, which was a no-go area for many years. Well, I've just done my 10th year now. Obviously, I've started again in my new world, but I was pleased to see this year the Mayor finally coming out under the Opportunity London banner. Well, that was the banner I set up 3 years ago. Yeah, that is cross-party, cross-sector of government and cross-sector of business as well. And I started that up when I was housing lead for London and local government, Labour local government spokesman on it as well, because I could see that what we needed was frameworks that worked, that brought public and private sectors together. And Be First is one of those. It's a development, investment and planning entity. And what it does in simple terms is it says it has two missions. First of all, it was to bring money in, and second, it was to bring social equity in as well. Right, so it's all right having all the money. We see that. You can see that at Canary Wharf. You can see that at Stratford. You can see that at King's Cross. Great developments, but if you're the have-nots, if you're the people on the lowest incomes, actually you don't live in these places, and you can't live in these places.
So how are you measuring your success in social equity?
So what you do is you have a proper understanding of the whole framework of people and their challenges in their wards. I can show you that personal index, people's personal index at a ward level, every ward in Barking and Dagenham improved over that 10 years. In fact, over 5 years it improved, some greater than others, but there was a complete understanding of what was needed to improve the localities of where people lived. Right now, Be First had that role. It had a role of building, so it was a developer. It was also an investor. So if you look at it, it wasn't just about housing, it was about green spaces. So we had 28 green spaces. When I left, we had 35 proper public green spaces, and there's more planned. If you look at innovation, actually the housing we were building is good quality housing that was, you know, at passive levels without having the official tag of being passive.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, because it was saying, well, actually we don't need the brand, we need the outcome. Yeah, and they were looking at doing that. They also were the vehicle that we used to buy the land to build the largest film studios, or the first stacked SME warehouse buildings, or the fact that we did the first industrial residential. You know, so it was about doing a lot more than that. Now we're planning, this is the last bit because it's really important because it all interlinks. Okay. We're planning, we were 338th out of 341 when I enjoyed the start of my tenure. 2 years of setting up Be First, we got into the top 3 best planning authorities in the country, and now I believe we're #1.
How was that measured? By how many units go through planning?
How many measures, how quick it could go through. There's all the different measures, and we were winning awards. I mean, we won loads of awards, which was nice, but we didn't need the awards. What we needed was to show the social outcomes, which we could do in every single ward with the social index. Yeah, so we could show that a whole layering approach, a 360 approach of inclusive growth actually improved people's lives directly or indirectly. So, you know, when we were doing regeneration on an estate, actually it may mean in another part of the borough we could show that we were repaving pavements or redoing the roads, and we could show the link between the regeneration on that estate in one part of the borough to the improvement on, say, the Becontree estate, which was an existing part of the borough.
So who owned Be First? Who or what owned Be First?
We did. Yay!
Who's we?
The people. The people of Barking and Dagenham, my friend, right? So the way it was set up was it was a wholly owned technical company, owned by the local authority, but no members or officers were on the board because I wanted professionals, right? As I said earlier, we're lay people, yeah, we don't have politics, and it's easy politics really. You just got to get one more vote than the guy you're up against or the woman you're up against, right? Actually, it's much more difficult when you start talking about complex situations like housing or infrastructure or business. You should get the best people in. So at that time, I got Lord Kerslake. He's passed now, but Bob was incredible. He'd asked me to go on some commissions for him, and I phoned him up one day and said, look, I'm thinking about this housing company, development company and planning company. Would you be interested in chairing it? I said, and I want the best. So Peter Murray from NLA, he used to be the chair there, he was on there. I mean, we had some really great people, but they were people from the industry.
From the private sector.
Yes, that understood. And, you know, we had people that understood the public sector as well. But, you know, but it was important that we had business, yeah? Because we were doing business. So whilst it's a private company wholly owned by the public sector.
Sure.
Now, what that allowed us to do was frame how we wanted it to operate. So when Be First brought any of its sites forward, the members would know that it was already within the policy framework that we had set as a leadership. Yeah. So actually, whilst there had to be proper review, you pretty much knew that it would go through planning in a timely manner. And I think we put 27,000 homes through planning in about 3 or 4 years. So it's pretty decent.
How was that funded?
Yep.
So how was the purchase of the site and the actual construction funded, and who would come in to build it? Was that where the partnership with the private sector came in?
So it varied. It depended. It was site by site. So some of it would be solely funded by the local authority. £1 billion we put into it, and you would expect that. We've just built 20% of London's social affordable housing. So that was the right thing. So I mean, by the time we're finished, I think with all the housing that's still coming through the system, if you like.
Sure.
I reckon we'll be close to 5,000 homes built for BTR, for Reside, which is our wholly owned housing company. And then we've got BD Energy, which was the district heating. So we've got the largest district heating system, or it was when planned. So how did we do it? Well, part of it was Public Works Loan Board, because there's no problem in capital spend, yeah, if you're going to get the return back through rental. And pay off the debt, and you're keeping an asset, and that asset's growing. Again, I find it really strange that no one's worked out that over 50 years, a single property in this country hasn't lost money unless you've destroyed it. Yeah. So the asset grows, but your debt falls. So surely that has got to be the mechanism that the government needs to work on with a wealth fund. And I know you've talked about a wealth fund. Well, funny enough, it was one of the things that I called it the infrastructure fund when I wrote a paper for the party called Build for Britain. And it was the infrastructure fund where I said that the local government pension funds, 5% of them should be put into this infrastructure fund that both the public and private sector could take money from, as long as you could show that it was actually an investment of social good with a return. Yeah. Because of course the pension fund has to make a return, but there's two ways of making a return. There's a financial return and there's a social return. And surely, and again, I get some you want higher yields than others, but actually it's really important because sometimes you need to then use the private sector as well. So we had the Green Investment Bank at the time, we had the European Investment Bank. I know people didn't like it, but you know, it's important they were willing to give us money, and
it's giving the local community a return on investment as well.
Absolutely. So and even today, Reside as a BTR operator facilitates all this social good, and at the same time gives a financial return to the local authority after it's paid all its bills. So it's a mixture of public, private, and it depended what the site was and what was required on whether it would be
outsourced, private.
Well, no, it was always, we didn't have the ability to build it.
Sure.
So Be First, again, separate to the council, it was its own entity, had its own framework. And it would work with all the usual suspects. I mean, Waits were great partners, Mo Lally's, Little Regional, Westerns were good. I'm trying to think, McLarens, you know, these, Wilmot Dixon.
Yeah.
These were all good partners that understood the vision, yeah? So I may talk to them about the vision, but the business end of it was done with Be First, and they became, they're partners.
So I love this because one of my pet hates of the UK is that we never kind of set up a sovereign wealth fund, kind of back when we actually had some decent assets and the UK balance sheet was a little bit healthier.
That hasn't happened for 100 years. You know that.
Yeah, but there's never there's never going to be a good time. So it's kind of let's get it done now. And what you've essentially done is done it at local level. And the other thing that this comes back to is sort of talking about measuring impact and measuring kind of returns. To be honest, I think they're all one and the same over a longer period of time, which is what you're looking at. And when you look at things like housing benefit cost, like surely people can see that if you can build these homes, even in, look, we'll get onto lower value areas in a bit, but even if the cost outweighs the capital value, over that time, the reduction in housing benefit, the increased income through rents, things like that, I mean, that's surely a great recipe for long-term sustainability of any financial institution, whether or not it's a local authority or a private one, to be honest.
Look, I don't disagree, right? The problem is how do you get the politics and the financial sector to once again see what their role actually is, which is to invest in people's value. And that's that is something that I was able to prove, that if you invested in people's value, we're talking about the poorest community, you're talking about the issues of land values not being right. Welcome to Barking and Dagenham. We had more in common with the northern towns and the valleys of Wales than we did with the rest of London. We are the last bastion of working class, blue collar London. And I'm very proud of that fact, but we managed to make it work. We managed to make it work through true partnership, not flavours of partnership where money is the preferential outcome. What we were talking about was an equal partnership of money and people, value of people.
So imagine I am leader of Blackpool Council.
Yep.
Okay, and we need to build more homes that people can afford.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going out to the institutions to try and raise capital to do this. We're pricing this realistically at building each unit is going to cost us 150 to 200 grand. Yeah. How am I doing that? Am I saying, listen, we're going to put that money in, and over time, our housing benefit is reducing over time, and also rents are increasing over time, and we're getting that back. So we're kind of ignoring the capital values, but we're looking at this as a fixed income play.
Yeah, and yes, basically, you're looking at all, right? So again, we've got to look at housing as the greatest infrastructure requirement this country needs for growth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything else stems off
everything.
That. Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything starts with a permanent home, right? They realised that 100 years ago. As I say, we were building, 27,000 homes were built in 13 years on the Beacon Tree with Alston cart and steam engines. We can't do that today. My question is, why can't we? It's all about attitude for me, right? Now, if you're that leader, there's some really difficult situations because your revenue account is saying you've got to cut everything, but you can still borrow better than the sectors can, all right? So why can't we make a mechanism that allows it to work at a local, regional and national level? So a wealth fund nationally, get it, infrastructure bank, I think it's called now. It's called now the Sovereign Wealth Fund, right? Great, excellent. But the thing is, unless partners can get financial outcome from that at the right rates, it's not going to work.
Well, this was the problem when Homes England came up with their model to fund, like with the Michael Gove thing, is no money got out because it was targeted at sort of some of these smaller developers, but it was tick box and they couldn't pass the first hurdle.
So, so one of the issues is, right, there isn't a master vision for people, purpose and place, right? Doesn't matter how many homes you're going to build. If they're not in the right place and they're not right for the right people, then actually you've just wasted your money. Yeah. So there needs to be an understanding of the need of the area in a micro level, right? So I talk about cold data and warm conversation. You've got to have that at the very beginning because otherwise you're just wasting public money. Yeah. If on the other hand though, you do all that work, and it's a lot of work, and it's a mindset change for local authorities, yeah. And then it's about finding the right partners that that will invest time and their money in that vision as well. So when you're talking to the community, it isn't just the residents of that community, it's the business community. So for instance, one of the other things I did was we set up the Barking and Dagenham Business Forum. Now, that was the local supply chain effectively to anchor institutions or businesses. I mean, when you look at how many jobs Be First created in just construction alone, I remember we had 39 cranes up in the borough just before COVID. And even in COVID, we still had a fair few. And even today, there's probably about 15 to 20.
So, right.
Go on.
Planning.
Yes.
Finance, labour to build it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get through those three things, and what can be done to make those easier for local authorities to build more social, affordable housing?
Okay, so planning. First of all, let's stop saying the planning system's broken. It's not. Okay, it's not been invested enough, and I again came up with a couple of ideas around that. So first of all, I would say that we need to make it attractive again for people to want to be planners, because actually it's a bloody good career and it's really important. And especially somewhere like London, I think NLA's got a great program called the Future City Makers, I think it is, and I'm working with them on some sort of foundation now about how we can get young people. There's a load of people doing some really good work out there, but we need to collate it together. So there's a conversation being had there, right? But first of all, we've got to make it that people want to do these jobs, because we've had a situation where we've told everyone that you're only a success if you've got a degree, you bought your house, and you got a luxury car, right? Well, no, that's not success. That's wealth. Success is a meaningful future for you, your family, and your community.
Success is liking what you do,
Absolutely.
who you do it with, and how you do it. Yeah.
So the planning system isn't broken. I've proved that. I went from 338th to number 1 in a number of years. At the same time, we managed to get nearly 27,000 homes through planning. So the system works.
So what did you do differently to get that?
We bypassed the bureaucracy of local government and used Be First. Okay. Yeah, to help the private sector. So you've got to understand what the private sector want. They want certainty. Yeah, no one can have guaranteed. They want less risk.
Yes.
Right. Okay. There's always going to be risk, but you can mitigate it as well as you possibly can, and we did. Right.
So from my point of view, as a developer, my biggest issue, there's lots, but planning, we're looking at 2 years for a typical small site.
You are.
And so when we do that, we
ask
need
the question why.
Well,
the reason why is because for 40 years, we haven't invested in it. If you go back 40 years ago, 80% of planners worked in local authorities.
What?
You now flip it on its head, I think 20% work in local authorities. Now, I'll go back to what I said before.
But there's another problem with planning.
Go on.
And that is the amount of... So now, when we put in a planning application, we typically have to do double the amount of consultant reports than we did 3 years ago. That's not a long time. And so that is extra cost. Now, when you're a small developer, that extra cost is a massive proportion of your margin.
Okay, so again, as I said, there's a number of things I would advocate for. So, a local plan. As soon as you've got a local plan, which has been consulted on with the community, right, after the master vision. So I think there should be a master vision, then there should be a plan, right? A master plan, local plan, whatever you want to call it. But once you've got that, in effect, that's outline planning permission. By default, it is. Because we've accepted as a community that there will be housing put in this location, or there will be whatever in whatever location. That's the plan, right? So there needs to be support in getting local plans through that are meaningful to local people, in a quicker way than has been currently happening. And I think the government's trying to do stuff around that. If you then look at regulation, I think, the best way I can look at it is there's a lot of well-meaning things happening that I don't think is conducive to what we're trying to do, And I worry that what we've done is blocked development with well-meaning without actually fixing the real problems. We need to build homes, but you need to build homes that are warm and safe and workable. And sometimes I think that gets lost.
So as leader of Blackpool Council,
Yep.
right, I've spoken to some capital, and I've maybe got them on board about, right, we're this is what we're trying to achieve, and actually it's beneficial for all the people here, and so there's starting to be a bit of momentum on that. Planning wise, we've got a new local plan in place based off the master plan, so we kind of know where we stand with everything. A bit of regulations coming down as well, so that's helping. Now we've got to actually find partners to build.
Yeah, but you forgot one bit.
Go on then.
The community.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so...
Well, we've with the local plan, that has...
No, because that
was with the community to find out what they need, yeah?
But that's still a physical plan, right?
Okay.
But where's the community's aspiration in that plan? Because the plan...
I thought you consulted on the local...
Well, we have, right? Yeah. But there's a difference between consulting on a local plan and asking people their aspiration.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So if you're a resident in Blackpool, and Blackpool's a wonderful place, right? I've been up there many times. You're looking at the place and you're going, does it inspire me? No. Are the schools working as they should? Probably not as good because they're not inspired, right? So what you've got to understand is, what is the need of that community? What is the purpose, people and place? What's it all about? Once you've got that, then of course you do the formal stuff of a local plan, right? Because you know where you're going to put different bits, right? Okay. Then it's about saying to those investors, you know, look, we're looking at this over here. Is this something that would interest you? Now, some would say yes and some would say no. But then another developer over another part, yeah? So I've got different people who invested in different parts of B&D because that's where they wanted to put their money. That's where their interest was.
Sure.
And that's how business works. An investor... so if you invest in a company, there's a reason why you invest in that company. Well, that's no different if you're investing in a community.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So
social impact funds, all that. You measure your return.
Absolutely.
And your return doesn't need to be financial.
Absolutely, right? So it's a mixture of both. I mean, it does have it. An investor needs a return, or otherwise they go out of business. It needs to be
sustainable.
Yeah, right? A developer needs to make a profit, but the community needs to be empowered. Yeah, and what we're seeing now is 50 years of this 20th century system coming into the 21st century system. So if we look at the right to buy through to where we are today, we haven't changed the system. We haven't had those conversations about what's our aspiration in the 21st century? Where do we want to go as a value of society? Because everyone has a value. I also built House for Artists. 14 different units that were live workspaces for artists, because I heard everyone was going to Berlin. So I actually went to the Brandenburg Gate with a big ticket saying return to Barking, because we could help you as an artist, right? But what really happened there was I used that one building, 14 artists, they paid 2/3 of their rent in the traditional financial transaction of cash, and another third of their rent in time. And that time was the value that they put into the community that they lived amongst when they do today, they run a little community centre, right? Now, people say to me, well, that's all very la-di-da. No, it's not. Think back to that 5-year-old in that triangle, yeah? A 5-year-old does not know the value of money, right? No 5-year-old does. If they do, then bit worried, right? But give that 5-year-old a crown or a pen or a pencil, yeah? Give them the ability to draw and to be aspirational. Actually, they become a better citizen. And then as they get older, they understand the value of people and money. And then we understand the value of society. And that is how we're going to fix a lot of the problems we see in our country today, is by putting value back into development, and that is inclusive growth.
So how have you observed, because we've talked about like your community needs, I'm going to call them customers, because Be First customers, I guess, is the community, even though they're also the owners. But
which is always a good.
Yeah, exactly. How have you observed your customer needs changing in the housing market in, say, Barking and Dagenham?
Okay.
And how should that influence design and delivery of future housing products?
Okay. So really, really simple. The community rent model is it. Yeah. So if I look at the cold data, and this is the data for London really, and most of our cities, most people earn between 20,000 and 60,000. And now if you do increments of 5,000, you'll see that there is a percentage, 6-7% in each one of those increments. Okay. So if you know that that's what your client base is, if you know that's what you need to try and build to, then you need to find solutions to make that happen. You need to have the finance in the right place to get a return. You need to show that the asset will grow and people will respect place. So what's really great is you don't see smashed windows. You don't see shutters on windows. You see active ground floor activation. You see different spaces that people want to congregate in, all right? Because that's what the customer's asking for. That's what the resident's asking for. At the same time, though, we found a mechanism, financial mechanism, that allowed us to invest in that over time, again, allowed us to get a return. So we were using capital that actually helped us with the revenue, because the demand was becoming less, and we were getting revenue return that was going into the local authority to help with services. So it's business, isn't it? But it's the business of residents, of people, and it's about not just bricks and mortar, it's about hearts and minds. And that's what inclusive growth was about for me. So the mechanisms are there. If I talk, Western Homes is a case in point. They're a regional developer in Barking, and when I stand in Barking Town Centre, when I do my inclusive growth tour, and if you ever fancy coming on an inclusive growth tour, you're more than welcome. I'm doing 2 this week, where I go around and I show these different elements of how you bring it all together. But Bob couldn't do what we could do as a local authority, but he invested his time and his capital into the programme. So he would do stuff that would go beyond the red line, into the wider community. At the same time, though, if you take his product, if you like, it's got 106, it's got BTR, it's got 2 different for sale types, 80% I believe it is, and 100% market rent, for sale, sorry, right? So what he's actually done is he's done his version of the community rent model. So different people from different parts of the community can live and work and operate in that wider community setting. Next door to him, you've got Eco World, Malaysian investment money. Again, they've got their model. It links into what's happening with Reside, which is the Barking and Dagenham Council model. Then you've got Granger, Lloyd's are over there as well. So, the BTR market has actually seen Barking and Dagenham as a really good place to invest, because this model is about different levels of community infrastructure, both in financial occupancy, i.e. what they can financially afford, because it's a false economy when we say everything's market rent, because all that happens is you get overcrowding. You get people that can't afford it after 6 months and then go to the local authority anyway. And that's what we're seeing. It's this false market, certainly in London, and that's the problem that so many boroughs have right now.
Do you think there's an issue now where, like, you've got LHA rates, for example, being frozen, you've got a reliance on the private rental sector to pick up social homes, social rents and temporary accommodation and all these kind of things. If we I don't know, if we could kind of click our fingers and go, right, every borough is going to do that Be First model, it's going to take some time to get to that level. Where is there a place for the private rental sector in this?
Of course there is.
And how can we make that more efficient at the moment? Because it seems to be that the private rental sector has been kind of picking up the slack
No, they've been making lots of profit, a lot of them.
Well, but they're not anymore, which is why they're leaving.
And that's the problem. And so what happened is they had their heyday, because if you go back 20 years and you was a private landlord, you'd pretty much get LHA rate. But hold on. Then what happened was that then they had to put the TA subsidy on, and then local authorities then had to go further and subsidise the TA and the LHA, right? Because
they didn't have their own housing.
Because they didn't have their own housing. If we go, I'll use Barking and Dagenham as the example because it's the best one I can use. We had nearly 70,000 homes that were there for the community.
Yeah.
Today it has about 16,500 homes for that community that has grown. So that community has grown.
So it's much more demand for the supply.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Now the problem was we could keep as it was, and then offload the problems to other parts of the country, which rightly so. If it was Blackpool, the leader of Blackpool go, well, hold on a minute, I've got my own problems. Yeah. Right. Now, one of the things I tried to do in my role for London councils and LGA was to get an agreement where you would notify. And it happens inner London to outer London, it happens outer London to the home, but actually it now goes all the way up the country because benefits were cut as well. And housing benefit is the first benefit, right? It doesn't matter if it's 3/4 of someone's income of they're getting from benefit, they've got to pay their rent. It's a false economy. And actually it's costing the state more money because it's doing the negative to schooling, it's doing the negative to growth, it's doing the negative to community and policing, NHS facilities. We're not strategically planning for growth. What we're doing is we're reacting to poor long-term policy, and what we need to do is say stop, right? Except where we are, around about 30 billion is being used right now in benefit on that. But then say, right, if the state was the guarantor, and if you as institutions were willing to put the money in at a return rate, but we have this section of the society that needs this type of housing, so we know it's going to be X amount of houses.
A 50-year housing bond or something.
That's it, a housing bond. But we can go further than that. Housing is broken for the for sale market, right? Most Londoners, most people cannot afford to buy a house. Now, if you go back again 50 years, one man or woman, one salary coming into that household, which was the norm, could buy a house.
Well, household salary,
not household, because that could mean two people.
No, but the average household earner is 1.4. It used to be about 1.3 and a bit.
Right. So, but if you take that as it is, right? Today in Barking and Dagenham, it's 13 times someone's salary, right?
But people don't buy with cash, do they? They get leverage.
Yep, we do, right? So let's look at the system again, right? I'm aspirational. Yeah, I couldn't get a council place. What I wanted was an institution who would be my partner to invest in equity into a property.
Yeah.
Right? Now, it doesn't matter if it's 2% or 100 or 8%, right? What we need is we need new models that allow people, so shared ownership as it is at the moment doesn't work in a lot of places because it's actually about a service return, services. Yeah. Now, 30 years ago, they had the DISO scheme, do-it-yourself shared ownership. Well, what did that actually mean? It meant you were partnered with a institution who would give you the money, but the property was your property. If you improved the property, you'll get the return of that, right? Of that improvement. So they got it on the current value over whatever period of time. Well, why are we not doing that now? Why are we not saying to people, you can have equity where you live, even if you was on benefits, right? So if you take like tax credits as it once was, why can't we say to someone who's a council tenant, you know what? If you look after your property, we will give you 2%, 5%, whatever it would be. What does that do? It means that that resident actually looks after that property more than they would because they've got an invested interest. But hold on, go and finish. Okay, right. I'm just saying, because at the moment, you get the right to buy. Yeah.
Isn't that the equivalent of right to buy, but they're taking a portion of it?
Yeah, but
And then it reduces housing stock for the
no, it
next
doesn't.
generation.
Because what you do is you say, you can't buy the property. We'll give you a slice if you like, you know, because everyone's aspirational. So that's a really low level, right?
Okay.
But I introduced as a local authority the first shared ownership right to buy scheme in the country. Okay, because I knew that as a council tenant, most of my residents couldn't afford to buy their house, even with the discount, yeah, because they weren't earning enough.
Yeah.
But they wanted aspiration. So I said, well, can't we give them a 25% stake in that property, 20% stake, whatever it was, in that property, and give them the discount, right? They only get it once, right? That can happen. So what I'm saying to you is...
Is that not having a negative impact on then the homes that the local authority essentially...
No, because the local authority is getting some equity to then invest in new homes.
Okay, but are they investing in new homes? Well, that seems to be the problem that's happened with right to buy.
Yeah, but that's the problem. Right to buy was you sold the asset, right? What I'm saying is you have an equity investment.
So how do you liquidate that investment?
You either die, which is a bit extreme.
So then it goes,
right, it goes to your kids, or when you're ready to sell up, you sell up, yeah, and it goes in.
What? So you sell it back to the local authority?
Yeah, you don't lose it. The local authority doesn't lose the asset.
Right. Okay. Good.
Right. What you're doing is you're giving people the ability to invest in the asset. Right. Okay. And people want to. Everyone is aspirational, so everyone wants a little slice of the action.
Okay.
So this isn't about selling. You're thinking about physical building. I'm talking about giving the ability to give them some investment opportunity.
So you're giving capital uplift, a percentage of any uplift that comes in.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
That is one of the things we should be doing in the open market, right? So we should have the ability to get institutions being partners, helping people to be able to be homeowners without owning the whole. They can own part, right? At the same time, we should be saying to those that are council tenants, listen, we believe in you. At the moment, the LHAs are broken across the board because most councils do not do the top end of local housing allowance. Well, which is a problem.
I think just going back to my original point, the problem is if you haven't got, if you're at that stage where we haven't built the homes yet. Okay. So where are all these people going to live? We need to rely a bit on the private rental sector. But if LHA is so low, then how are we motivating them to actually do that?
That is the problem, right? But our problem is it's still a £30 billion cost. Yeah. And if we're going to up the LHA, that cost goes up, right? Remember, those...
But I'm talking in that. So if we're agreed that we want to get to that end point, so it's that middle.
But you need there's a pathway. It's going to be rocky, right? But it's a bit of both of these, right? So you've got to stop saying it's going to be one tenure only. It's got to be multi-tenure. It's got to be the community rent model. Right. That means more investors will come in and invest because they're going to get a slightly better return. It means developers can.
But how long is it going to take to get to that point? Is what I'm saying.
I've already proven the concept.
Yeah.
Well, if every borough had done what I'd done, we'd have been not too badly off. Actually, numbers.
No, agreed. Yeah.
Right. Now, if you then take. So I personally think that if you look at the new mayoral systems that are being set up, actually they should have a B first.
Yeah, I 100% agree,
because everyone should have a local plan, right? Everyone should know what their policy is, and that policy should be pretty close to each other. I never understood why, when you talk about SEAL on 106, right, why there's so much difference. Actually, about 75, 80% of it is the same across all local authorities. So if you've done that as a given, it's only that little element of trying to articulate what's special and important about that place, because every place is different, right? You're going to speed up. You're going to speed up supply. If you look at the 1.5 million homes, right, that's how many went through planning. If you look at the local plans, there's 2.5 million homes that could be built effectively, right? So it's not like
Why do you think they're not?
Well, there's a whole ream of reasons why they're not. Some of it is because some people don't want, not in my backyard. Some of it is there are people holding, that are holding land because they have a business model that says this is how much they're going to build every year on year.
I mean,
and some of it is because the politics gets in the way. Yeah, and we've got to accept that as well. And then ultimately, it's the financing of it. And we need a new mechanism that allows the state, the citizen, and the institution to get a better outcome of all of it.
Because I haven't met anyone that that's sitting on land with planning, ready to build out, that isn't building it out unless it's because they don't have the resources to build out at the moment.
And I agree with that, but I can also say to you that I saw it in Barking and Dagenham, someone would get outline planning permission and then flip it up on 4 times its value.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great, well done. You've just taken all that money away from the local community. Yeah, flipping land is as bad, for me, worse than land banking. Because if you're going into a relationship with that community to say, we're going to invest in this place, you then decide, no, I'll get outline planning permission, and then I flip it for a much bigger price. Ultimately, that does cost the local authority.
But what it's doing is it's taking the risk. So why is the local authority not getting the planning?
It's taking the risk in the respect that
if I go and buy a piece of land,
go on, I'm listening,
and then I've got to get planning on it, I'm taking a lot of risk.
Well, not in Barking and Dagenham, you're not.
Not if I've got you on my board,
But this is the point. I get that it's all risk, but the truth of the matter is there's a risk ultimately to the community. So
absolutely, but my point is, if you want to get the private sector kind of motivated to do this, then it's about risk-adjusted returns.
Of course it is.
And so they've got to look at that.
But again, the private sector has also got to understand its responsibility to the risk as well, right? So first of all, we talked about planners. I believe there should be a system where people should go through university, because it's a university degree to become a planner, right? And they should do 2 years in local government, right? Or a period of time in local government, right? And there should be a fund that all developers, everyone involved in the development industry and local government should put money into that if someone wants to say and do local government, they can. Because the income of someone in local government compared to someone in the private sector is quite dramatic. Right? So if we want planning to work, we need to mitigate that as an issue, right? We need to show people why they should be in the local government sector, and if they want to stay in it, we should pay them accordingly to what the market says is the rate. Yeah, that will improve planning quite quickly.
Shouldn't you, what about kind of people are compensated by, or people behave how they're compensated a lot of the time. So maybe is there performance targets? So is it how many units the borough gets through planning at certain stages and things like that?
So my thing would be, I've already proven the fact that if you resource it properly with the right, I have to say Caroline Harper was our head of planning. Private sector come and works in B first, right? 27,000 homes went through. There is nothing wrong with the planning system, okay? The problem, there isn't, fundamentally there isn't, right? I've proven that fact. Where we have problems is it's not resourced enough, it's not valued enough on all sides, and it's not starting from the right place. It's not starting from what that community wants. Right? So if you've got a master vision, you're the developer. So I'm going to say to you, Rod, come in and invest in Barking and Dagenham, or invest in Blackpool. Because I'm helping the leader of Blackpool now. Rod, come and invest, right? We want this amount of housing at this level, what site takes your fancy, and this is what we want to see at that site. And you go, well, I'm not really into arcades and residential, but I'm into hotels and residential. And we go, great, no problem. This is what we're looking for, and this is how quickly you're going to get through planning. Because we need it. We need it. We know how it's going to happen. this is going to be your risk and this is going to be our risk, right? At the same time though, this is going to be your return. Yeah. Everyone knows what's being asked of them.
Yeah.
And once we do that, once we can have a mechanism that's open and transparent, then actually we're taking a lot of risk out of the system. That's what we did in Barking and Dagenham.
So should the council say, we're giving this site planning for X, who wants to bid to build it out?
And that isn't a problem at all, because actually that's what lots of councils are already doing. We're saying we've got planning. So if I take the film studios, we bought the land. Yeah. So whilst I was revenue was telling me we had to cut lollipop personnel, I was borrowing the money on the Public Works Loan Board to buy the land for the largest film studios in 25 years. We took it through planning and then we sold it to someone who knew how to run film studios. What has that actually done? Well, it's provided thousands of jobs. Okay, it's given new aspiration to the place, people and purpose and place. And at the same time, it will bring in they reckon about 35 GVA into the local economy because of that anchor institution. That is the facilitation of what local government's about. It's about facilitating the aspiration of their community and finding partners that they invest in it. That's how we build communities.
We've got a lot of regulation around housing at the moment with various licensing schemes and things like that. I've heard you talk about a property MOT. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So we had the experience of having the only borough-wide, so council-wide private landlord scheme in the country. Newham had the first, but they didn't have it across the whole borough. They didn't have the need actually in certain parts. In Barking and Dagenham we did, and one of the things we were also doing was we were inspecting, which I know they didn't do originally in Newham, and that's really important. And I went on some of these inspections, and I saw that there was a real issue. Some of the properties themselves, I mean, we were talking about 80, 100-year-old properties that needed upgrading and brought into the 21st century. Some of them were just overcrowded and people were making, a lot of money in a very poor way, rogue landlords and stuff. So I was talking about, and I've spoken about it for a number of years now, where rather than having all these different systems, which currently we do, and they're talking about Airbnb, which is another issue that's taken 70,000 homes out of London's temporary accommodation because they can earn more money in Airbnb, but the antisocial behaviour happens and it's the local authority who picks up the cost. So what I've said is, well, why can't we operate the same as we do with cars? In effect, ECP, every house needs to have it, right? So we need to make sure that every house is fit for the future. Now, when I was at MIPIN, probably just before COVID, it may have been just after, I can't remember now, a few years ago now, I was talking to the industry of investment and said, look, if I wanted to fix up the Becontree estate, at the moment it's ridiculous because we had the largest investment in developing the Becontree estate for the 21st century, as in housing. 20 properties it was £140,000 a property. Ridiculous amount of money, just not worth it. How could a citizen do it? How can the state do it? And how
So is it a good investment? Because how much are you going to save in kind of sustainability, utility cost?
All of that, right? So you can have that whole debate, right? But the thing is, the middle class talk about the green agenda. The working class have been talking about the cost of living crisis, right? The damp and mould issue was a cost of living crisis linked to the fact that the housing stock wasn't up to standard. You couldn't blame the citizen, but nor should you blame the local authority, because nor have they had the money to actually fix the problems for a very long time. So there's a whole raft we could go around that. So for me, this was pretty simple. We need to know what our current stock is like across the country. Now, the best thing I could link it to was a car. If you want to use your car, if you want to get insurance, if you want to put it on the road, if you want to make sure that it's safe, you get it MOT'd. Well, if you can start at the ECP side of things and build from that, you know what the state of every property is, regardless of its tenure and regardless of its ownership of that tenure. But you'll have all that information as well. Now, all the different good, like the landlord's provision that's out there, the good landlords want all this, right? So I was saying, well, actually, if we've already got the land registry, why can't we have a proper property registry that's linked to it? And I know there already is in play, but we extend that every local authority effectively are the bastions of getting that information. Now, they don't have to do it directly. They can do it with the private sector. Yeah, the same as MOT stations operate as private entities, but they link into a national scheme. That's no different to housing. And if we can do that, what we then do is we make housing a new asset class. By making it a new asset class, it's now institutional investable. Now, if you take the Becontree estate, 16 different designs, 27,000 homes, we could say to an institution, we want to fit out this whole estate. If you do that, you now have dual grid networks, which means you don't have to wait about UKPN, who can't facilitate the growth that we need. You can do that at a local level. The citizen is better off because they get better housing. Their utility costs drop dramatically. At the same time, being a dual network, you can now operate street electric vehicles in a combined network, which again supports where society is going, right? At the same time, the investor gets a better return because at the moment, if you take UKPN, you get about 4p a kilowatt. Yeah, if you produce your energy and sell it to them. Yeah. Well, if you're an electric car driver, you pay anything from about 55p a kilowatt up to £1.20 because it's unregulated at the moment. I know that as an electric car driver, right? So if you take that, the citizen's better off in their home. The society is better off because actually it's less cost for the utilities and the cost of living crisis. And you get local green produced energy that is actually community based, and the cost of retrofitting one house to a whole street will bring that cost totally down in a very quick way. So you don't do it individual pepper pot housing based on need, you do it on a statewide investment, institutional investment operation. So it doesn't cost the citizen and ultimately it doesn't cost the state, and the investor gets a return.
Okay, but with that cost, how does that return work? Because over time, I mean, like you said, it's expensive to retrofit.
It is.
Even if doing it on scale, and then you've got another issue of who the hell's doing it because everyone's building 1.5 million homes for labour.
Well,
so
but then again, you're not old enough to remember white gold. So when everyone did the right to buy back in the 80s, you got servo warming. I don't know if they're still running as a company, but you got servo warming to do your central heating, and you got PVC windows, right? Or my parents did. Okay, that was called white gold back in the day. If you're a phonetics, right? That's how it worked. This is now what I call the new green gold. Right. You get FE colleges actually doing the right schemes that make them ready for work. You get HE doing as well, because there's a whole different, you know, from frontline trade through to university degrees needed for this. Okay, it brings a whole new industry, which is separate to the current industry of building new homes. Okay,
I don't disagree.
I don't let me finish. You get the institutions to pay because they will already get a better return. Because if you insulate the house properly, actually they'll get a return from the house owner anyway. And they'll get that. If you then put it into, so you have a solar farm on the roofs and a substation under your feet, which is the local authority, the local authority get money. So if you take that 55p, the investor who's investing will get 30p of that, say, 40p of that. The local authority get 5p of that. The infrastructure company that's running the infrastructure gets 5p, and so on and so forth. You can make the business case add up. Investors, when I was at MIPIN, were happy to invest because they could see a return. At the moment, London produces 2% of its own energy. Okay, we live in a wind tunnel.
Yeah.
Okay, it may not be sunny every day, but it produces enough PV energy to actually make it surplus to requirements. And especially with the new data, AI, all this new world, those companies will pay a premium because they already have to. So I'm not saying, listen, I'm just a mere layperson who linked into the idea of how do we make housing an infrastructure that actually works with the wider infrastructure that involves vehicles and all the rest of it. And that's basically what I'm saying is you start at the easiest point, which is we know that housing needs investment. Now, we could argue what investment it needs, but what we need to do is find a way of investing in it in a way that operates for the institutional investor, because there's no way the citizen or the state has the funding to do it itself today.
And we're seeing problems with Section 106s at the moment and trying to repurpose that as well.
Section 106, again.
And just registered providers in general and social homes. Like when you look at the whole regulation thing, I agree it's a mess, but none of the regulations are being enforced, and so we keep coming up with new regulations on top of ones, because we've got plenty of things already that are in place that kind of answer a lot of that.
But the problem you've got is we do not have a transparent or open system.
That's true,
right? And if you had the MOT, property MOT,
I agree
that
with
would be the first. That would be the first stop. We know who owns that property.
I think
we know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
If I take, and I'll give you a situation, we had a person that had 32 people in that property, right? The local authority had to go to court. It took us 6 months to take action. Ridiculous amount of time, right? We should have had the power straight away to say to that landowner, that owner, you should have known what was going on in your property, and you are now going to pay for the next 3, 4, 5 months, whatever it is, for the local authority to address the social problem you have caused, because it was causing problems for the neighbourhood. It was causing problems with rubbish. It was causing all these problems. At the moment, it's down to the local authority. At the moment, the local authority's got temporary accommodation issues. It's got social care issues. It's trying to run operations of 300 different services with half the money it had a decade ago.
So why do they keep adding these licensing schemes when they've got existing ones that...
Because what you've got is you've got a broken understanding of what's needed to be the solution to the problem we're trying to fix in the first place.
Definitely.
Which is the conversation we had earlier about football stadiums and other bits and pieces.
So Darren, last question, because I know we've kept you long enough. Now that you're out of local government, what is it you're doing?
So I started up a inclusive growth consultancy, and I'm working with other people that I worked with whilst I was in the public sector in putting together the framework I've been talking about. So how do we have those proper conversations? How do we do those master vision? At the same time, it's sort of saying, the best way I can explain it in a power of 3, in the triangle, is I understand how local government thinks. I've been there. I've had to do it in the worst of times. I also understand how the private sector needs to operate, because I've worked alongside them and with them, and I've been in it before I was in public service. But I also understand how community thinks, because again, I've taken a community that voted for the extreme, the BNP, and the chamber when I left, and it is today, was the most diverse chamber in the country, with 14 different countries represented in the chamber. So I've taken the community on that journey. So what am I doing today? I'm helping any public sector organisation or entity that wants advice on how to do that piece of work, because it's about changing the ethos. And then I'm helping the private sector think about ESG. Do the E okay, the G's not too bad, but the S can be shocking sometimes. So it's how do we bring all of these partners, that triangle together, to actually build the future we all want to see for this country.
Brilliant. Well, you've certainly got a fantastic track record in that, so I'd definitely recommend anyone listening to get in touch with you, and we'll leave your contact details in the show notes. So thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Rod. Cheers, mate.